Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and this is FreePBX 101 version 15 part 9, where we're going to be talking about extensions. Yes, we are finally going to get into actually creating some extensions. And there's a lot that goes into extension creation. In this tutorial series, we're going to talk about extensions. We're going to talk about associated users that go with extensions. We're also going to talk about zero-touch provisioning. We're going to do zero-touch provisioning for the Crosstalk phones. We're going to do zero-touch provisioning for the Sangoma phones using the Endpoint Manager. We're going to talk about manual phone setup, device mapping, all that sort of stuff. But it all starts with extensions. So, before we dive into extensions, if you guys are enjoying this tutorial series, make sure you give me a like and subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions so you don't miss out on any of these wonderful videos. It's completely free and it really helps out the channel. Also, if you guys need any sort of voice over IP equipment, including phones or phone servers or accessories or support on FreePBX, go check out crosstalksolutions.com for all of your voice over IP info and needs. Finally, if you're just interested in buying me a beer, there's a link down below to do that as well. Okay, let's hop right into our extensions. Here we are at the desktop of FreePBX. We just left off from the backup and restore module. Now we're going to go to applications and we're going to bring it down here to extensions. Now notice right now that we don't have any extensions whatsoever. So what we want to do, instead of saying add extension, where we can actually add all of these different types of extensions, we're just going to do quick create extension. And the quick create wizard basically allows you to input just the most common extension settings. If you have a whole bunch of extensions to input at once, this is a really nice way to kind of do them rapidly. And then if you need to edit the more advanced settings for any individual extension, you can later go back to it and edit those advanced settings. So we are going to stick with PJ-SIP for this tutorial series. There is another type of SIP called CHAN-SIP, and notice it now says legacy. We do not want to use the legacy stuff. CHAN-SIP is deprecated at this point. Do not use it. All right, use PJ-SIP. In fact, in newer versions of Asterisk, CHAN-SIP is not even compiled into Asterisk. If you want CHAN-SIP support, you have to recompile Asterisk in Linux to add CHAN-SIP support. So that is just how deprecated it is. Do not use CHAN-SIP. Use CHAN-PJ-SIP. So then we have our extensions. Now for me, I would recommend a minimum of 3-digit extensions and don't use extensions starting with a 1. Why is that? It's because the extension starting with a 1 can potentially conflict with some of the feature codes. So for instance, there is a feature code called *1 that allows you to turn on and turn off on-demand recording of an active phone call, right? So if you're on a phone call, you can hit *1 to start recording and *1 to stop recording. Another feature code, if you want to transfer directly to someone's voicemail, you do a transfer and then a star followed by the extension number. So now think about that for a second. If you're on an active call and you go to transfer to someone's voicemail, you hit star and they have an extension, 101. Well, is it *1 to turn on recording, or is it *1 and then you're going to continue, typing extension 101, right? So it kind of confuses the system. So there are ways around it if you absolutely have to use 1XX or 1XXX extensions, but I highly recommend against it. Especially if you're planning a new PBX deployment, just plan on not using 100s or 1000s as your extension numbers. All right, so we're going to start as extension 200. Then we're going to put a display name. We'll just say Michael Scott. Outbound caller ID we can leave blank. Then we need an email address, and we're going to click Next. Now on the second step, we can enable or disable Find Me, Follow Me. For right now, we're going to leave this disabled because I'm going to do a separate video on Find Me, Follow Me later on in the series. So we're not going to cover it too much as part of this video, other than we will sort of brush up against some of the concepts. So for the parking lot, we're just going to say default lot, and default lot should be the only lot that you have unless you have Park Pro, which is a paid commercial module add-on that allows you to have multiple parking lots. Again, call parking is a different subject that we're going to cover in a different video. So for now, we're just going to leave it as the default lot. We do want to create a user manager user, and the group that our user is going to be in is the default all users group. That's perfectly fine for now. We also want to enable voicemail. And notice what the voicemail pin is. It says 200. So by default, when you do a quick create extension, it sets the pin code, the password for your voicemail box, equal to the extension number that you're creating. And when you do that, it prompts the system to say, hey, let's run this user through the voicemail setup wizard, which has them record their greeting, it has them record their name, and it has them change their voicemail passcode. So just keep that in mind. If you ever have employee turnover where you're changing an extension out for a different employee, if you set the password for that extension equal to the extension number, it is going to run that new user through the voicemail setup wizard yet again, and erase all of the old information. So we're going to leave that as 200, and we're going to click Finish. So there we go. We have our first extension. Remember, by the way, to click Apply Config after you create an extension, especially if you're trying to hook up a phone to that extension. We're not going to cover device mapping in this video, but I've done it so many times with a soft phone or a hard phone where I create an extension, I try to connect the phone to that extension using the password, and it won't connect. And it's because I didn't hit Apply Config, right? That password and that extension doesn't actually exist in FreePBX until we hit Apply Config. So let's do that now. And now let's go ahead and edit the extension that we just created and go through some of these settings. So you see all of these tabs across the top, General, Voicemail, etc. We're going to start with the General tab. Now right off the bat, you can see that it tells us that this extension is using PJSIP and it's on port 5060. This is just for your reference, right? Because you can change this to ChanSIP if you want. Again, don't do that. But ChanSIP is typically going to be on a different port. So this is just telling us, yes, we're using PJSIP, and the PJSIP port is port 5060. Just an informational message. You don't need to worry about it other than that. So display name is the name on the extension. This is going to appear on other people's phones when this extension calls other people. Outbound caller ID is the caller ID that this phone should use when it's making outbound calls. If you leave this blank, it's basically just going to take the default caller ID for your outbound route or your SIP trunk, right? Which are two things that we haven't done yet in this video series, but we will get to. So for the purposes of extensions, you really only need to set outbound caller ID if you specifically only want this one extension to use this specific caller ID that is different from the caller ID that you're calling through your outbound route or your trunk. And then we have emergency caller ID. Emergency caller ID is a setting that you're going to want to pay close attention to because your E911 has to be really bulletproof, meaning that any phone that dials 911 has to send that call out to the authorities with a valid E911 address, and that E911 address has to be the physical location of that phone, basically within like shouting distance, or in other words, if the authorities come and kick the door down, they better be very close to where that person dialed 911. Now, why would you have a separate emergency caller ID for a specific extension? Well, imagine a situation where you have a whole bunch of people working from home. When they make regular calls in and out of the office, they're going to be calling out with the office's caller ID, right? So whatever the main phone number of the office is. But if they dial 911, you would not want that call to go out with the phone number of the office because it probably has the address of the office associated with it. And if you're someone working at home, that's not valid, right? That's a bad E911 address. So if you're having an emergency, you call 911, the authorities are going to show up to your office, which could be in a different state for all they know, right? So the emergency caller ID setting here is a per phone setting where you can set a caller ID phone number specific to the location of this actual extension. Okay, so again, if I'm at home and my office is in a different state, my caller ID phone number when I dial 911 should be different because I'm at a different location. Okay, so that's what the emergency caller ID is used for. Then we have secret. This is the password, the SIP password that we're going to be putting into the phone once we actually provision a device. Language, you can mostly leave default unless you have bilingual language settings set up in the PBX. We're not going to be doing that as part of this video tutorial series, but just be aware that, if you have some, English-speaking employees and some Italian-speaking employees or German-speaking employees or Spanish-speaking employees, you can set up different languages in FreePBX. So when they call and check their voicemail and stuff, all of the prompts are in their native language. Next, we have our user manager settings. Now, in FreePBX, there are extensions, such as we're setting up right now, and then there are users. These are two separate things because a user can have control over multiple extensions, right? So the user is essentially the permission structure within FreePBX, whereas an extension is just an extension. And then separately, of course, you have a device that maps to an extension. So for user manager settings, you can typically just leave this default because the quick create extension, we added a user as part of that process. Okay, next we're going to go through the rest of these tabs, but first, a quick word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by the fine folks over at VoIP.ms. Now here at Crosstalk Solutions, we have curated a list of 3 main SIP providers that we recommend to our clients. One of those SIP providers is VoIP.ms. VoIP.ms provides metered pay-as-you-go SIP trunking services that are cost-effective and easy to set up. You can start making calls in as little as 5 minutes. VoIP.ms has more than 50 POPs strategically located around the world, and they can get DIDs in over 60 countries. Their platform also supports more than just simple SIP trunking. They can do SMS and MMS. They even have their own hosted PBX capability that allows you to connect your phones and devices directly to their services. We recommend VoIP.ms to our customers because their service is really solid and because the trunks are super easy to set up and use. You can even check out my video on how to set up and configure VoIP.ms SIP trunking using PJ SIP on FreePBX. So be sure to check out VoIP.ms, there's a link below in the description. Alright, now back to the video. Okay, thank you very much for that. The next tab is our voicemail tab. So voicemail, of course, very important for all of your extensions. I should point out as well, for this video, you look at all of the settings that we have on all of these tabs. I am not going to cover every single setting as part of this video tutorial series. It would just be impossible. There's too many settings. So I will cover the most pertinent settings or the most important settings when it comes to sort of general setup and use of your extensions and phones and users and whatnot. So here we are in voicemail. We can see that the password for this user, the voicemail password for this user is 200. Again, it says right here, set this password to the same as the extension number to force the user to set up their mailbox on first access. And again, that's going to have them record their greetings, it's going to have them record their name, and they're going to have to set a different password, at which point the password will change. It'll no longer be the same as their extension, and it will not run through the wizard the next time around. Okay, so require from same extension is an interesting setting. It's more secure to turn this setting on. In FreePBX, there are 2 different feature codes that you can use to check your voicemail from the phone itself. There's *97, which means check this phone's voicemail box, whatever phone you're on. *97, I'm checking the voicemail on this phone that I'm on. Then you have *98, which is check a different extension's mailbox. So if I'm on this extension, but I wanted to check the voicemail for someone else's extension, I can do *98. It's going to prompt me for the extension number, and it's going to prompt me for the password for that extension's voicemail box. But if I'm on this phone and I do *97, it assumes that we're checking voicemail for the phone that we're dialing this on, and then this setting, require from same extension, determines whether or not we're going to prompt for password from the same phone. So if you leave this to no, on this phone, if I dial *97, it's just going to go straight into that phone's voicemail box without asking for a password. But if I turn this to yes, and I dial *97 on this phone, it's going to prompt me for a password to get in. So it's a little bit more secure if you do it that way. Email address is for voicemail to email, so you want to make sure you have a valid email address in there. And then these settings down below essentially control the voicemail to email settings. So Email attachment. Do we want to actually attach the voicemail to an email in WAV file format when we send it out? In most cases, we do want to do that. So it's either, basically, are we just notifying via email that someone has a voicemail, or are we notifying via email and also including that voicemail in the email? Then we have play the caller ID of the person that called. Again, this is a personal preference. Play the envelope, which is essentially like the date and time stamp. And then we have this setting down here, delete voicemail. So this is something where, imagine a scenario that you receive a voicemail. It comes to you in email as an attachment, and so you can listen to it on your computer through your browser or through your email client, and then you just delete it because you don't actually need to listen to that voicemail. Well, that voicemail is still in your voicemail box, right? It was sent to you via email, but there's another copy of it in voicemail. So this setting here, delete voicemail, basically says when voicemail to email happens and we send that email and we attach the voicemail along with that email, do we then want to delete the copy that's in the voicemail box, yes or no? And the reason that we want to do that is just to keep things cleaner, right? If we're emailing it off and you're checking your voicemail through email, maybe you don't want to have to go back into your voicemail and then manually delete everything that you've already cleared out, using email. The caveat here is if for any reason the voicemail to email is not received, FreePBX is going to delete that voicemail out of your voicemail box anyways. Okay, so there is an opportunity or a chance that you will not receive a voicemail, an important voicemail maybe, right? So before you turn delete voicemail on, make sure that the voicemail to email is working really, really well. Okay, down below we have the VMX locator settings. VMX locator is essentially like a small auto attendant for your voicemail box. Basically, if you turn on VMX locator, when someone goes to leave a voicemail, you can have a greeting that says, hey, thanks for calling Chris. I'm not at the phone right now. Press 0 to go to the operator, press 1 to try to locate me, or press 3 to leave a voicemail, right? So you can kind of give the caller different options. It's not a very used setting, so we're not going to cover it as part of this tutorial series. The next tab is our Find Me, Follow Me tab. Find Me, Follow Me is a way for calls to get to you no matter where you are. So for instance, if you go to lunch, you might want to enable Find Me, Follow Me so that when someone calls your extension, that call will then forward through to your cell phone. And I am not going to cover this in great detail because I'm going to do a completely separate video dedicated to Find Me, Follow Me later on in the series. If you click on Advanced, for the most part, you're not going to have to touch anything in Advanced. I will give you one exception though, which is a setting that we set on a fairly regular basis. If we scroll down a bit, we can see this setting here. It says Max Contacts. In PJSIP world, and this is one of the reasons why PJSIP is superior to ChanSIP, you can have multiple devices that have the same extension. So like you could have multiple desk phones that are the same extension. Maybe you've got a home phone and a phone at work, but they're both extension 200 and they both ring when someone calls extension 200. You could have a desktop phone as well as a soft phone client on your mobile device as well as a soft phone client on your desktop PC. And they're all extension 200 and they all ring at the same time when someone calls extension 200. But that's what's called a contact. So each different extension that is logging in as extension 200 is a separate contact. So by setting max contacts to 1, which is the default, we're basically saying only one device at a time can be logged in as extension 200 or as whatever extension. So if you're going to have multiple devices, you're going to want to bump this up. So I'm just going to bump this up to 5, and then we're going to click Submit. And if we scroll further down in Advanced, we can see some recording options. So if you want to record a specific extension, and I think I will probably do a video, completely separate video, just on call recording because it is a pretty big topic. But for instance, if you want to record inbound external calls, yes or no, outbound external calls, inbound internal calls, outbound internal calls, etc., etc. This is where you can set up your call recording on a per extension basis. This is where you can also set up your on-demand recording. So remember I talked about earlier, we had that feature code *1 to enable on-demand recording. That feature code is not enabled on your extensions by default. If you want your users to be able to dial *1 to initiate a call recording of an active call, you need to come in here and click Enable for on-demand recording. The next tab is the pin sets tab. Honestly, I feel like this should be moved into the other tab because it's not a setting that we use very often, so I don't think it should be its own dedicated tab. But there are some situations where you need pin codes to dial out. So for instance, if you enable pin codes to be able to dial internationally, that is something where pinless dialing, this setting right here, would allow this extension to bypass the need to have to dial pin codes for whatever reason. So again, it's not something that we use pretty much ever, so I'm just going to skip that. And then if we click on Other, here we can see our 5 contacts where we can set each of these contacts to a completely different physical device, or certainly we could also use soft phones. We have iSymphony settings. iSymphony is kind of a control panel dashboard for FreePBX. Now, we don't use iSymphony. We think there are better products out there instead of iSymphony, so we're just going to ignore those settings. Extension routing. There's no extension routing settings available right now because we don't have the extension routing module turned on. What that module does, if you do have it turned on, is it allows you to choose which extensions can dial out of which specific outbound routes. So for instance, if you have one outbound route that outpulses one caller ID and a different outbound route that outpulses a different caller ID, for instance, if you have multiple businesses within the same sort of umbrella organization, but these extensions are for business A and these extensions are for business B, you can do that with extension routing and basically say these extensions have permissions to dial out this route, but they don't have permissions to dial out this other route, right? So that your caller ID stuff never gets confused. And then finally, in the Other tab, we have our paging and intercom override. This basically just can override the default for paging and intercom when this phone receives an intercom. So basically, if you're already on a call and someone intercoms you, are we just going to reject that call? Are we going to ring, instead of intercomming, are we going to ring basically a second line while you're on the active call? Or are we going to force the intercom to come through your speaker anyways? So again, just a setting that you probably won't ever have to deal with, but it is here as an option if you need it. Okay, once you're done with your extensions, make sure you click Apply Config to save all of your extension changes. There is one more thing that I want to cover as part of the extension creation, and that is the bulk handler. So if we come over here to Admin and then click on Bulk Handler, the bulk handler allows us to import and export CSV files for various functions within the PBX, such as extensions, DID, user manager users, conferences, the blacklist, emergency caller IDs. So it basically gives you a way to mass import and export settings. So if we go over here to extensions, we click on export and then click export, we get a CSV file generated. If I click on that CSV file, we can see some extensions. So I created a second extension here, Dwight Schrute, and then we have all of the settings for all of these extensions, right? So you see all of the extension settings in here. There's a ton of extension settings. So now what you can do is populate this whole list with all of the extensions that you want to import. This also works, by the way, if you want to change or mass change a whole bunch of stuff on all of your extensions, and then import the CSV in order to save yourself a heck of a lot of time by not having to go through that quick create wizard for every single extension in your system. And we use this bulk handler all the time. Basically, if we have more than like 10 extensions to input, we do it with the bulk handler. It just makes everything so much easier. Okay, as you can see here, I have populated out a whole bunch of extensions that we can now import with the bulk import. So let's go back to FreePBX. We're going to click on Import in the bulk handler. We're going to click Browse to select our CSV file, and then we're going to click Submit. And as you can see, it has successfully imported all of the rows of that spreadsheet, and then I can choose Replace/Update Existing Data, and then just click Import. And there we go. I can click Finished, and now if I go back to my extensions, Applications, Extensions, we can see that I have a whole bunch more extensions populated, and that was a lot easier than adding them in one by one. Don't forget, however, to click Apply Config once you're done. Okay, that is going to do it for extensions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you give me a like and subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions for more videos just like this one. In our next video, we're going to talk about the concept of zero-touch provisioning before we move into the subsequent videos where we're actually going to be setting up phones and we're going to start making some phone calls. Won't that be exciting? All right, we'll see you guys in the next video.